Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Ron Paul Liberty Report. I'm Ron Paul, your host.
And I'm Daniel McAdams, co-host and executive director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity.
Very good. Daniel, nice to have you here today, as usual. But you know, this is an anniversary of sorts that I want to talk a little bit about. And it's probably a sad anniversary. But believe it or not, it's 1 year since there was a coup in Ukraine. The civil war has been going on ever since. Unfortunately, I think most Americans haven't paid a lot of attention to it because they don't read anything about the casualty reports, but it's still a very significant event. There's been plenty of warnings how this could explode into something much more dangerous. But interestingly enough, and I don't think this is the reason they had this committee hearing, but the British Parliament in the House of Lords had a meeting, and it's the committee that was in charge with European affairs. And they reviewed what was going on in Ukraine, and they concluded from this report that it was a catastrophic error on the part of the British for getting involved. And they also have a general, British general who's in NATO, who has also said that Cameron was a foreign policy embarrassment, irrelevant to it. So these are pretty strong terms, and this raises questions, you know, how unified they are. Is there dissent going on, or exactly what's going on today? But it seems like this might not be a bad time, not only for the British to be reassessing this war that's going on, but everybody involved.
I think you're seeing a reassessment, and as you're right, it was a year ago after the protests in the street had gone on for 4 or 5 months, and they ebbed and flowed, and then toward the very end, some say mysteriously, they got very, very violent. There was just a BBC report where they finally interviewed someone, one of the protesters, who we were told all along were peaceful protesters. They interviewed one of them that said he was on the square shooting guns. He wasn't trying to kill the police, but he was just shooting at their feet. So we're seeing, as you say, a reassessment of what happened at the time. And I mean, I think the main mistake that the UK made really was probably going along with the U.S. coup attempt and the U.S. war propaganda. If you remember, on the night of the 20th in 2014, everyone went to bed with a deal having been sealed between the elected President Yanukovych and the opposition. It would be early elections and a few other concessions that were made. The rest of us went to sleep, and the next thing you knew, there was a violent uprising, and the president had to leave the country. And several parts of the country that voted in particularly high numbers for him didn't accept the coup as legitimate because it was a non-elected coup. Crimea being one of them, and they held a referendum where I think upwards of 90% voted to break away. And then in eastern Ukraine, they also had a vote where most people voted, but in that case, the new government in Kiev decided to send in the military.
You know, in this report, they talked about they didn't assess the mood right, and they made a mistake, and they didn't have enough expertise to study the Russian reactions. So it was a technical matter. Of course, there's been a lot of technical and political problems ever since then. But you know, this raises a question about why it comes forth from a committee and saying, well, you know, there's something wrong. This wasn't the right thing. Sometimes it's automatic that they're doing this because there's a certain group resisting it. Say, you made a mistake, you shouldn't have done it, and why don't you quit doing it? And the other explanation is they're coming out and saying, you know, you messed up because you didn't go in with a full enough force. And, you know, quite frankly, I don't think they revealed this clearly to me. It could be one or the other, but I think both sides use this. Don't you think this is always the problem, even with every once in a while we have our neoconservatives criticizing neoconservatives, and what are they? Are they coming to our side or what?
That's exactly the neocon ploy. They say, well, it's not our fault, you didn't do enough. You know, we even saw a report yesterday or a couple of days ago, the NATO new Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said, it's not our fault that Libya is a disaster. We went in and we bombed it like we were told, but you didn't do enough to try to fix it afterwards, so don't blame us.
That's right. But you know, Cameron came back. He didn't come back with a wimpy statement, you know, go, go, go. And he says those sanctions are going to be on, and we're going to put more on, and they're going to be on for a long, long time. Doesn't sound very much like he's striving for peace once you hear him talk.
And his defense minister, Michael Fallon, said this week that that Putin was more of a danger to Europe than ISIS. So, and he also said that Russia poses a real and present danger of invading the Baltics.
Yeah,
you know?
that was part of this statement too. They're saying this, and they're trying to wake up the people. You know, if you don't pay attention, the next move, the Russians are on their way. They're going to take up all the Baltic states. And but there's an answer. I think the people in the Baltic states aren't exactly frightened by this.
Well, what's interesting is the Baltic states have been the most ferociously anti-Russian, and they have a history of, you know, in their view, being occupied by the Soviet Union. So they're very, very anti-Russian. But when Fallon came out with this statement, both the Latvian and the Estonian defense minister said, you know, back off a little bit. Don't be too radical. We don't see a real danger. So it's obvious that this is war propaganda.
You know, it seems like so logical to us to say, well, the solution for all this is, why are the outsiders involved? Well, the outsiders are involved because the other outsiders are involved. But if we only had a world where if there is a conflict and they're arguing over internal politics and it gets pretty rough, like in Ukraine, but actually, you know, that was an economic problem. You know, if they had a good economic policy, I don't think there'd be any fighting there. It was whom should we go to bail us out? Yeah. And so some wanted to go to Europe, and the others wanted to go to Russia. But that is a great argument that meets our criterion. That is, why get involved in this? And yet here we are. I'm pretty convinced that most Americans would have difficulty finding out where Ukraine is and what's going on and how violent it has been. There's been a few battle deaths during this war already. Hasn't that been the case?
Yeah, they've estimated that about 5,600 people have been killed, but a lot of people involved say that is so far too low that it's not even funny, you know. I mean, there may have been, in this latest skirmish, there may have been couple thousand deaths, you know, on the military side even. So,
you know, some of us who have taken the position that smaller government is always best. It was great when 14 or 15 republics seceded from the Soviet Union, and it wasn't a bad idea when we seceded from the British Empire. So it seems like that would be a great solution here. You know, it isn't like it is a totally unified country. They have two languages, and some identify themselves as European, and some people identify themselves as Russian. But if they could just work out something on friendlier terms, have a loose federation, and still have a West and an Eastern Ukraine, and still be loose enough where you could have trade and travels. I'm sure relatives are on both sides of this. But this whole idea that these powerful governments from East or West come together, and we are going to take over and be involved. It just seems like, but all immediately you'll hear on television if somebody talks about secession, whoa, what kind of a radical person that is. But then sometimes when you mention that on the internet, you find out there's a lot of people, and that doesn't sound like a bad idea, you know, having more independence for local government.
Well, people that are in favor of liberty always want to see government at a more and more local level because it gives them more accountability. But you're right, you know, a loose federation immediately after the coup probably would have resulted in a country that was not blown apart, blown into the Stone Age, and also would be starting to renew trade ties because they do need each other, and they all need Russia. Russia's a next door neighbor. They need to trade. It's beneficial for everyone.
And if I took advice from the libertarians, they would say, make sure that this federation, you have free trade and free travel and a sound currency and a market economy. Estonia and a few of the other Baltic states were a little bit more free market oriented. So there's no reason why they couldn't do it. But bad policies lead to bad results. I think is a typical example of bad economic policies end up, you know, leading to more violence. I want to switch a little bit to talking about the president. You know, if you turn on the news and listen a little bit, all of a sudden there's a lot of talk about this terrible president who won't say radical Islam. And I find this a bit of a mixed bag because if you listen to Obama, of course, if you're a Republican, you're not allowed to listen and reason. But Obama presents his case about why you shouldn't blame 1.3 billion Muslims for 20 or 30,000 that are not acting like most Muslims act. But he will say exactly almost the same words that Bush said. But Republicans say, oh, Bush was okay because we could trust him, but we can't trust Obama. But I think that this whole thing of religion being used by these violent groups has to be one of our biggest problems, and we see it in the Middle East. We've seen it elsewhere.
Why do you think it is that that nobody wants that they criticize him for not blaming the radical Muslims, just as Bush was criticized for not saying radical Muslims?
Well, I think there's an ulterior motive for that. It turns out that they don't want to offend some Muslims, even if they are radical. And they're thinking mainly of Saudi Arabia. Here we have Saudi Arabia. They beheaded a lot more people last year than ISIS did. They'll do it for religious beliefs, blasphemy, speaking out, for First Amendment rights. They can lose their life. If a person gets raped in a country like that, could end up being killed by the government. They have Sharia law, and yet we're never to say anything. 14 out of the 19 participated in 9/11. But I know Obama, George Bush at first thought, well, we got to smooth this over, and anybody from Saudi Arabia got out of the country very quickly. They weren't even quizzed. But I think in some ways, this would be my guess, that George Bush was being very pragmatic. Don't rock the boat with allies, that have oil. And I think Obama. It really raises the question, maybe there's a softer spot in his heart for the Muslim people. And, of course, that just roused the people up. That roused the conservatives up. But anyway, they take the same position, and I think that's a telltale story.
I think your old friend from New York got into a bit of a fracas over this as well, too, Mr. Giuliani.
Yeah, what was he saying? He was... He was talking about the.
He doesn't love America.
Obama yeah. He was saying that that Obama doesn't like America. Now, I wonder what it takes to get neocons to get angry at a neocon and tell him that he's over the top. But I guess there's a certain limit that they can go, and then they'll turn on them. But it's this excessive political correctness, I think, that drives this. But
as you point out, there really isn't that much difference between the two sides. Looking at what Giuliani said, he doesn't love America because he doesn't believe in American exceptionalism. But Obama spoke at West Point last year, and he said, quote, "I believe in American exceptionalism with every fiber of my being." So.
Yeah, and that's where our real problem is because, when a country goes to war to do good, they can motivate people with good intentions, and a lot of that is happening. And we had, all the way back to the French Revolution, it was designed that way, to Woodrow Wilson. We have to take care of the world and make the world safe democracy, and now we have this modern age. And then they say, well, America is exceptional, and I think in many ways we have been. But my big argument is we're exceptional, especially in the past, because we did defend liberty. We did not go out and provoke wars. And we were, believers in free trade and markets, and we set a standard. But today, the idea that we are so exceptional that we can solve civil wars and strifes and wars that have been going on in the Middle East for so long. So, anyway. I believe that we live in a bad time, and this 1 year since the takeover with Poroshenko in Ukraine is an indication that it's going to be around for a while, a long time. And I think they make our argument because it's a failure. I see a split coming up, and I think it's not uncharacteristic to see that religion is pulled in, as Obama complains, no, you can't use these religious beliefs to blame all Muslims, because quite frankly, there's some things done in the name of Christianity that I as a Christian, I feel offended by, but I do not believe, from my understanding of the faith, that Christians should be the champions of preemptive war, initiating war, and that to me is aggression. So, and the neocons were rather blunt about this, and they said you need to get a religious fervor behind these movements, and certainly that is what's happened. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today.